Hello, and welcome to the 8th class on David. Let's start with a quick review. Last time we explored David and how he became foolish when filled with himself instead of God and needed beauty to stop him from doing something very ugly. Do any of you live in a safe, orderly, secure world where you experience only success? Yeah, me neither. The reality is that we live in a world with failure, accidents, and frustration, and sometimes we want to run for the hills. We aren't the only ones. We read in Psalm 55, I said, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm." How many of you dream of a cabin in the woods where it's quiet, no bosses, no screaming kids, no deadlines, no idiots with licenses on the road? We all fantasize about escape, to go to the wilderness. Though we recognize it's a place of danger, it can also be a place of healing. In David's life, wilderness brought danger and refuge, and it also brought community, but probably not in the way you would expect. 1 Samuel chapter 22. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. David escaped to the cave at Adullam, where his family joined him. This is a little surprising when you remember where they've been. David's brothers were passed over when Samuel came to anoint David as king, and then they mocked him when David brought food to them at the battle with Goliath. And now they join him? Likely they realized that Saul's anger at David would spill over to the rest of the family, so they needed to get out of Dodge. David also recognized the danger and sent his parents to the country of Moab, out of harm's way. But David's brothers stayed. Maybe during difficult times, they banded together and became brothers in a deeper way than before. So that's David's family taken care of. Now who else joined him? All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. David's company is filled with people who are distressed, in debt, or discontented. The rejects, the losers, and the misfits. How many of us would apply for that job, lead that department, shepherd that small group? Actually, I'd prefer to hang out with people who had it all together, who were influential, happy, who were satisfied. Yet they all lived together for a decade in the wilderness, developing a camaraderie which led them to be named as David's mighty men in 1 Chronicles. Why is this important? It helps us recognize that God works in the middle of people who need help. People are defined not by where they came from or what they did, but by what God did in and for them. This is an absolute key to understanding the church. Honestly, how many of us have been disappointed by the church? We go to church looking for God and find a bunch of losers. We love the sermon on Jesus inviting all who are weary and he'll give them rest. Then next week, there's a big push for volunteers to help in junior high ministry. Is anyone surprised? People say, I love God, but I hate the church. If only I had a nickel for every time I heard someone say the church is full of hypocrites. Let me let you in a little secret. It is. Churches try to respond to this criticism by improving their image, changing worship, offering the latest and greatest. But that's not what a community of Jesus followers looks like. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, "Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him." For most of us, spirituality includes dealing with people you wouldn't choose to deal with or would choose to deal with you. For the most part, we're not going to be with the beautiful people, but with God's people. So David plots his escape. But David thought to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. The best thing I can do is escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will give up his searching for me anywhere in Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. So David and the 600 men with him left and went over to Achish, king of Gath. David and his men settled in Gath. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. David accomplished his goal. Saul will finally leave him alone. Here's a surprising twist, though. Now that David has escaped from Saul, he's gone to work for King Achish of Gath, the Philistine enemy. Not only does David join the enemy, but then he double-crosses Achish by raiding Philistine towns and lying to the king, telling the king that he's attacking Israelite towns instead of what he's really doing. Achish trusted David and said to himself, "He has become so obnoxious to his people, the Israelites, that he will be my servant for life." Yikes, how can we understand what's happening? We can claim the moral high ground and criticize David for not being a better man, for not trusting God in this situation. Or we can take a purely pragmatic approach and see this as a successful way to deal with the world, making David into a hero for escaping Saul and then attacking Israel's enemies. Because all's fair in love and war, and insisting on ethics will only get you killed, right? David is doing more or less what he had to do to survive, but notice, the biblical writer doesn't say it was the right thing to do. Here we have the subplot of the whole David story. David's lack of morals, his questionable ethics, and his wobbly spirituality, that's not the story. The story is about God's work. The spiritual life is not about what we do for God, but what God does for us. Here's a warning, though. This isn't a story that gives us license to cave to culture. We're called to be just and merciful and truthful like God is. Instead, this is a story of what happens when you're overwhelmed by a culture without a way out. A story of God behind the scenes, working all the angles. It's the same story retold in the book of Revelation. Many people find themselves living in enemy territory under the rule of a King Achish. It's a job with a company that exploits people and the creation. It's a family that dismisses Jesus. It's an economy that abuses the poor and ignores the oppressed. It's a society where might and power win over truth and justice. But God will work out his purposes, even when we can't lift a finger to help. Which brings us to Ziklag. So on that day, Achish gave him Ziklag, and it has belonged to the kings of Judah ever since. David lived in Philistine territory 1 year and 4 months. Ziklag became a military fiefdom for David. He received land in exchange for his military service to King Achish. More importantly, Ziklag became the center of operations for David and his community. It represents a way of living life in this imperfect world that is different from what our culture usually offers us. Some people think that choosing moralism is the way to navigate the world. They're convinced that there is an absolute right way that you're able to discern, to choose, and then to carry out in each and every circumstance. Unfortunately, I've discovered that life really isn't black and white. Moralism places the burden on what we do, which marginalizes God and his role in the world, sapping us of mercy. Others turn to secularism, arguing that since we live in a fallen world, it's better to accommodate to it and grab all the advantages you can so you can serve the Lord. These people rely on their economic shrewdness, their career expertise, and social networks to get ahead. But this underestimates God, and faith becomes irrelevant to daily life, blinding us to justice. Ziklag represents the place where we really get serious about the Christian life and the fact that we live among losers, misfits, and people who aren't nice. Today, we call this place, this community, church. We're all searching for meaning in our lives. Here's the deal. We're all going to be disappointed in our churches, our communities, our small groups. They're filled with hypocrites, whiners, gossips, doubters, addicts, the unloved and the unlovable. Filled with sinners just like you and me. Now we can try to escape, to go it alone, but our private Christianity isn't Christianity, or at least not the Christianity we see in the Bible. We need God, and we need each other. So God shows up in and through this ragtag community and creates lives of humility and courage, virtue, suffering, prayer, and obedience. For David, that place was Ziklag. For us, It's in, of all places, the church. Now, some important takeaways. People are defined by what God has done in and for them. We need God, and we need each other. And God shows up in the midst of our imperfect communities. I'd encourage you to check out the discussion guide, which also includes study suggestions and other activities. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll see how David deals with disaster by being, if you can actually believe it, generous. Until then, keep the faith.